Hello, it's another video from the Angry Photographer. I can actually come to you with something actually hard and fast on the new Nikon D7200. I will be reviewing it either next week or the week after next. I actually made a special trip today to the camera store to verify the results of 3 others as to the shortcoming of the Nikon D7200 and where it stands apart from the Nikon D7100. So this will not be a subjective view, rather a hardcore fact on what to expect and what to either be appreciative of or what, to me especially, I found rather disappointing about the D7200. But I'd heard this before testing same today. The Nikon D7200 carries a Sony sensor. The D71 carries a Toshiba sensor, but what really separates the two is that while the D7200 has better low light capability and breaks away from the Nikon D7100 at roughly ISO 3200, where it becomes a better high ISO performer, what it suffers greatly is that the D7100 in low ISO, from 100 up to 2500 plus, the D7100 has far superior dynamic range than the D7200 does. Far superior shadow detail. Now, for me and for many people that do a portraiture and daylight shots, if the detail isn't there, it cannot be extracted out of it. You can't generate, no matter what you do in Photoshop, if the detail isn't there, you can't generate. You can tweak it a million different ways, and that is very disappointing. It turns out that side-by-side comparisons, I've had 3 other people confirm, my buddy Stefan, and then I went out today to test, but I did not have the ability to keep the D7200. That it turns out that the D7200 has bad low ISO shadow detail and dynamic range. I can say this as hardcore set in stone fact. Side by side, a couple other YouTubers have actually confirmed this, and they have test samples for download, but I confirmed it myself, and my buddy Stefan confirmed it as well on his D7200, which he actually plans on returning. He's actually a portrait shooter. This means that bringing out the shadow detail and the dynamic range of shadows, especially in portraiture shots, is much more difficult on the D7200. I was trying to think of a very simplex analogy of where the D7200 can be compared to the D7100 analogously, and the D7200 is basically like a super expensive fast sports car that really sucks between 5 miles an hour and 80 miles per hour. But once you hit 80 miles per hour, then it purrs along like a hummingbird. And apparently, the nature of either the combination of the processor or analog digital converter or the Sony sensor that is in the D7200 causes it to be sensitive and the breakaway model at ISO 2500 and higher compared to the D7100, but it suffers horribly at what is very important to me and a lot of other shooters is that it lacks shadow detail and dynamic range in ISO 100, 200, 600, 1600, up to 2500. And that is so important. In raising up a shadow detail, and side by side to the D7100, the D7200 fails miserably. It does not have the detail retention of the shadow and the shadows between ISO 100 to 2500 and 3200. So that is really disappointing. So D7100 is better for portraiture and daylight shots and low to intermediate range ISO use because it has extraordinary dynamic range for shadow detail. Of this is not my opinion. It's I can say for certain, written stone, that this is hardcore fact, that I could state this without any reservation or worry about repercussion on this fact. So if you are considering the purchase of the D7200, I can say specifically, other than obviously its higher buffer rate, which of course is important for sports and action and some other things, which is a part of its selling point, obviously so, that the D7200 is more of what I would consider a sports and action hybrid of the D7100. So it has a higher buffer, but either a combination of the Sony sensor and or the processor and or the analog digital converter, the D7200 is a low light loser and a low ISO loser. It is unquestionably inferior to the D7100, but it does excel and shine and kick the fanny of the D7100 for high ISO, 2500, 3200 and above, for the details there. So this is really the lowdown on this, and I will be doing a full review of the D7200 either later this week or next week, but I can confirm firsthand and from 3 other sources that this is the nature of the D7200. That basically she's just like a fast European sports car that just absolutely sucks on side streets. You know, I've driven some of those really expensive. I didn't own one, but I've actually driven some of those really expensive cars, and they just suck and they're horrible. You know, at 5 to 50 miles an hour. But once you get them purring on the interstate, then they excel. And but like most of you, I'm a portrait shooter and a daylight shooter, and I absolutely need that shadow detail and that dynamic range in the shadows that the D7200 is between ISO 100 and 2500 and 3200. The D7200 is unquestionably a failure. How do I quantify that failure on a scale of 1 to 10? The two side by side, if the Nikon D7100 rates an 8 on shadow dynamic range between ISO 100 and 3200, the D7200 ranks a 3 or a 4. So a 3 or a 4 on the D7200 for low ISO shadow detail and dynamic range, whereas the D7100 on low ISO dynamic range and detail ranks in the 8. So people need to consider this fact. The people are touting the buffer rate of the D7200, which is valid, and they are touting the high ISO breakaway of the D7200, such that it is able to capture the detail, the greater detail at ISO 25, 3200 and above. But that comes with a caveat in that it is a low ISO loser for shadow detail. I know I repeated myself here a few times, but this is really important, especially making a logical choice for those who are considering the purchase of a D7200. You need to ask yourself what sort of shooter you are, and obviously Nikon knows these empirical facts, and a lot of Nikon shooters were interested in a higher buffer rate and also better dynamic range at high ISO. But what has occurred is that the D7200, while excelling now at buffer rate and high ISO, is now a low ISO shadow detail loser. And, I, of course, quantified the loser, the term loser in this sense, rather subjectively, but not very much so. Comparing the two side by side, I mean, I'm right there. So, if this helps you at all, I appreciate it, and I would have not have made this video if I wasn't not 100% certain of this. And I will be doing a full hands-on review of the D7200 next week. But those who are considering right now a purchase of the D7200, I thought that I should rush this accurate information to you so that you have a more informed choice before making a purchase that you may or may not regret. Anyway, thank you so much. Just another video from me, Angry Photographer, and I'll catch you later.